programs. This was better than a wake-up call. So we went to work just as soon as Guyana's first standalone Ministry of Public Telecommunications was established. And coming forward 3 years later, I'm happy to say that in Budget 2019, my ministry put forward the first set of proposals for programs with direct benefits for persons with disabilities. And I was so excited, we were so excited that those recommendations were approved without question. Hats off to the Minister of Finance and the Ministry of Finance. And as many of you will know, they included duty-free tax concessions on imported vehicles which are specially equipped for the disabled. And similarly, concessions on smartphones and other computer devices that are preloaded with special apps and accessibility features for persons that are either visually or hearing impaired. This, folks, is a big step in the right direction. Today, as I mentioned, is World Telecommunications Day and Information Day. And therefore, and it's also the 50th year since the ITU began to observe the day, May 17th. For us in the Ministry of Public Telecommunications, there's no better way to celebrate this anniversary than with this groundbreaking program for persons living with disabilities. In closing, I wish to reiterate that Guyana is running a fast marathon to bridge the gap in internet accessibility while inculcating ITU international standards into every initiative. Our geographical population, though most of us are on the coast, we're ensuring we're not going to leave out those in our hinterland, poor, and remote communities. With that said, I thank you all for being with us again, and we look forward to this informative and enlightening presentation from our friends at the ITU. Thank you very much.
I would just like to echo the Minister's statements. We at the Ministry of Public Telecommunications, we're extremely proud and happy that we could be the pioneers of this type of program, looking to include our citizens with differently able citizens into Guyana's development. The next person I will call to the stage will deliver the keynote speech and a presentation. I welcome Ms. Roxana Widmer-Ilescu, the ITU Senior Program Officer and focal point for ICT accessibility. Welcome to the stage, Ms. Ilescu. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Would you mind if the person far behind will join us here in front? I would be very happy to. Please. Please.
It's a nice, close
yes.
group.
Exactly. Will make us feel much better.
Is it kind of cold in the room too?
Yeah. Yes, a little bit.
Romario? Thank you.
So please, honorable ministers from the government of Guyana, Honorable Minister Ms. Catherine Hughes, Minister of Public Telecommunication, other distinguished representative for government of Guyana, representative of the University of Guyana, Ms. Beverly Peel, National Commission on Disabilities, distinguished guests, audience, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by expressing my deepest gratitude and appreciation to the government of Guyana, and in particular to our ITU member state, the Ministry of Public Telecommunication in Guyana, for hosting this event on ICT accessibility for the implementation of the national program Internet for All in Guyana, and of course for your very kind hospitality. On behalf of ITU, let me address all congratulations to the government of Guyana for the efforts and concrete actions to make progress on ICT accessibility for persons with disabilities and towards building a digital inclusive society in Guyana. We are all here today because we share a common vision and goal. We believe that information and communication technologies can have a far-reaching and positive impact in people's life, and through the action we take in our personal, professional, and institutional capacities, we can all contribute to improving people's lives. Perhaps some of you are less familiar with ITU. We are the United Nations Special Agency for Information and Communication Technologies and committing to connect the world, and this without any discrimination. Our work is people-centered. We facilitate the smooth functioning of the global telecommunication systems and networks to enable millions of people to use their networks in their daily lives, including when we send an email, an SMS, make online purchases, use satellite navigation systems, or simply watching TV or listening to the radio. These days, ICT are present in everything we do, in every aspect of our life, and accompany each of us everywhere and in all times. However, these technologies are not always available, accessible, and affordable to everyone. In this context, one area of ITU work in the development sector is improving digital inclusion globally. Our activities are designed to empower people through information and communication technologies, regardless gender, age, ability, location, or financial means. As such, we promote the accessibility of ICT and their use for social and economic development and full and effective participation in society and in the digital economy of all people, including persons with disabilities. Indeed, accessible ICT are good for all people, not just for persons with disabilities. So let me explain. How many of you take for granted being able to send a text message to friends in other countries? And I'm glad that we have some young people with us. So come on, raise a hand. How many of you? Okay. Do you know that 30 years ago, even less, this was not possible for us when we were at your age? And how many of you know that the text messages that we're using every day were initially intended to enable persons with hearing impairment to also use phones and so to communicate? And this communication tool, the text message, is currently used by all of us. This was a landmark ITU stand called V18, enabling deaf people to communicate when ITU pioneered the work in ICT accessibility in the 1990s, to align text phone protocols and allow different and previously incompatible text phones in different countries to communicate. Following this success, ITU also standardized the bump on key 5. Do you remember this one? The bump, the small bump on the key 5 of the phone? Well, this is an ITU standard to assist blind and visually impaired people, but also to facilitate all people dialing under low light conditions. ITU consider ICT accessibility as a pressing need and a vital issue of our times that can overcome disabilities. Let me tell you why. Perhaps some of you are aware that over 1 billion people in the world today live with some form of disability. Perhaps what you know less, and again, I'm very happy that there are some young people with us, over 1 billion young people are in risk of hearing loss due to unsafe listening devices and practices. And moreover, the world is getting old. Older persons age 60 and above who face age-related disabilities, so means lower vision, lower hearing, lower possibility to move easily, are estimated to grow to up to over 2 billion in the next 30 years only. I will give you more details in my presentations. So, if we add up these figures, we observe that over 4 billion people will need accessible ICT in the next 13 years only. Let's take a moment to reflect on these figures, which show us not only that there is an enormous need to make ICT accessible, but also help us to realize that since none of us is getting any younger, all of us stand to benefit sooner or later from each step taken to advance in the area of ICT accessibility. Therefore, we are your key partner for government and policymakers who want to implement ICT accessibility in their respective countries and regions. In concrete, we develop and make available resources and guidelines for our members. We share best practices, raise awareness, build capacity, and we also provide in-country assistance in implementation of ICT accessibility policies, strategies, and programs like the one we'll do here in Guyana with you, Internet for All. Through our work in digital inclusion, we aim to support our members to develop accessible ICT environments at the national and regional levels and ensure that appropriate action are taken to make ICTs available, accessible, and affordable for all people without any discrimination. Ladies and gentlemen, we all inhabit the same world. How would you like to live behind this world for your children and grandchildren? Discrimination can impact everyone. 50 years ago, the world stood up to eliminate racial discrimination. 20 years ago, we stand up to eliminate gender discrimination. It's now time to stand up to eliminate all type of discrimination and to defend an equal, equitable, and inclusive world. ITU's national program in web accessibility, which we will implement over the course of the next week, will allow access to governmental online information, e-services in Guyana without discrimination. As a result, this program will not only contribute to the social and economic empowerment of persons with disabilities, but also to their inclusion in the digital economy and their participation in the country development. By the end of the training, we'll not only have developed and strengthened national capacities based on international standards in ICT accessibility, but we also will empower the University of Guyana with the necessary curriculum to ensure that Guyana will continue to develop national capacities in web accessibility. And last but not least, We will also provide you with a self-sustainable educational model that will enable the development of a fund for an educational program for persons with disabilities to also make possible to train the end user on how to use the websites that will be made accessible for them. Your efforts to implement a barrier-free national digital environment, ensuring equal and equitable access to public information and services at the national level, builds upon the important work that Guyana has already done towards fulfilling the rights of persons with disabilities. Indeed, following the Person with Disability Act passed in 2010 and the ratification on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that Guyana signed in 2014, with its next historical engagement in creating an accessible digital environment, Guyana is set to become a role model in the topic of ICT accessibility, which may inspire other countries in the region and around the world to follow your example. For this reason, I would like to commend all the leaders and all of you present here today, because each and every one of you have stepped up to the challenge of ensuring the accessibility of Guyana public websites so that all your citizens, regardless their abilities, will benefit from the opportunities that your government offers in education, in employment, in commerce, in health, or entertainment, among many others. We strongly believe that this web accessibility program will be a landmark effort to support equal access and equal opportunities for all, reducing inequalities and ensuring that all citizens participate in the country development and thus increasing the country's economic worth. This is the legacy we want to leave behind for our children, to ensure they have and they live in a world that provides equal opportunities for growth and the development of all people with dignity and autonomy, a world in which no one is left behind. All of us have a role to play in making this a reality. And while recognizing that everybody's work makes a difference, it's only by working together that we can make the change towards building digital inclusive societies globally. Thank you all for joining ITU in making a better and inclusive digital world.
Okay, I'll ask Ms. Ilescu to return to the stage as she is moving right into her presentation. Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit more in detail about the National Program on Web Accessibility. As mentioned, we are all here together to enable the citizens of Guyana have access to public online information, e-services, and products. Guyana has done a lot of steps towards ensuring equality and equity. And I would like to mention the Person with Disability Act, launched in 2011, who provides protection for rights of persons with disabilities, including in education, recreation, and even transportation. The National Commission on Disabilities is responsible for addressing implementation, monitoring, and also awareness raising in provision under this Act. As already mentioned in my speech, you have to be aware that Guyana also ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2014. And recognizing that accessible ICTs are very important and key for developing inclusive digital societies, we are implementing now this program on web accessibility, Internet for all. Let me tell you the main global commitments to reduce inequalities. We have two. The first is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And this convention is one of the most widely ratified international human rights treaties, which reaffirm that persons with disabilities are entitled to be the same and to have the same treatment as anyone else. Over 90% of the countries in the world have already ratified this convention. So more precisely, 177, and 162 countries have signed this convention. And there are two articles that I would like to share with you. The Article 9 of this convention, which refers to the right to have access to the information and communication technologies. And this goes along with transportation and other rights. And also in the Article 30, which refer to the right to have access to television, video programming in accessible formats. ICTs contributes to all CRPD's articles. Why? Because, as just mentioned, like it or not, ICT are part of every aspect of our lives. The second is what we call Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. And in the agenda of the SDGs is recognized the great potential to accelerate human progress that have the ICTs. And there are some who are specifically referring to inequalities, like the Article 10, but also these equal rights to everything, to education, to jobs, opportunities, are also mentioned in several other articles. The most important is that the ICTs can eliminate the barriers to enable persons with disabilities to live an independent life and so as to create inclusive digital societies. What does it mean, really, inclusion? Inclusion is different of integration. Integration means we put something inside. Inclusion means mainstreaming. And therefore, the digital inclusion, when we talk about digital inclusion and empowerment of people through the information and communication technology, keep in mind that the mainstreaming is very important, that this technology should be for everyone, regardless their gender, age, ability, location, or financial means. Well, I was telling you about the global usage of the ICT and the impacts. I have here a map that shows the world in the next years. And I would like you to try to find your country and to see which it will be the situation in the next year. And I have to let you know that everywhere in the world, we will face this problem that over 2 billion people aged 60 and above, as stated by the UN report on the world population aging in 2017, who will face age-related disabilities, so will need accessible ICT in addition to the 1.1 billion of people who live with disability, and in addition to the 1 billion youth at risk of hearing loss due to unsafe listening devices. And I would like to mention that this was a work that ITU was leading with the WHO, with the World Health Organization, and we finally managed to have a standard last year. Because perhaps you don't know that the devices that you are using, and in particular since you are using with headphones, these damage your hearing. And this damage is not possible to be recovered, never ever. So now there is in place a standard. We also develop a toolkit and work with governments to raise awareness among the user and to let them know how to use these devices, who for the moment do not let you know that if you continue to listen music with this high volume, you will lose your hearing. So by 2050, we are predicted to be about 9 billion. And if we do the simple math, we will realize that over half of the world population actually will need accessible ICTs in the next 30 years. But we are talking about accessible ICT. What does it mean, accessible ICT? And we are talking about equality and equity, and it's not always very clear. I have here two images of 3 young people of different heights. And they are all sit on same type of box to access an information, which is a baseball match. They are behind a fence. And suddenly I had the idea to put a normal phone instead of these boxes. And I was thinking, is equality enough? It's equal access to a device, to an equipment enough for all of us to access the information. And actually, we are all different. Some of us are taller, some of us are smaller. So we need to adapt to everyone's needs. So this is what they are doing now, the accessible ICTs, which are, for instance, the smartphones. That means they have the accessibility features embedded in the equipment from the design stage of fabrication. And that means that everyone can use the same device, so it's inclusive, based on their own needs or circumstances. Means if someone is blind, can use it completely with all the accessibility features. If someone is only wearing glasses or contact lenses, which is my case, I only use part of those to be able to increase fonts or make in bold some specific font that I needed. And for a young people, perhaps for the moment, there is no need, but we are still using the same device. So an accessible ICT is the equipment plus equality and plus equity. And only this type of accessible information and communication technology can actually be the same for all users. How ICT can overcome barriers? I think it's It's quite simple. The disability is the impairment plus the barrier. So if I have difficulties to speak, I will use emails or voice recognition. If I have a low vision, through the ICT, I grow the font size, and of course change the colors, contrast, whatever. I'm a blind person, I use the screen readers. Or I have difficulties in using a mouse, I surf using a keyboard. Lastly, if I'm a deaf person, I read the captioning, if there is captioning in the video that I'm watching it. So, we were talking about accessible ICTs, which are the only one that are ICTs for all, and have this embedded accessibility feature from the design stage of fabrication, can be used by all users, and also are compatible with assistive technologies, which is very important. What does it mean, assistive technologies, or AT? For us, represent a complement to accessible ICTs, because it's a separate hardware or software that we add to an equipment of service, and in general is used for persons with more severe disabilities. Perhaps some of you do not know that before, the computers didn't have embedded, for instance, the screen readers. Now it's almost obvious that all the computers have screen readers. Last but not least, affordability. Affordability is also a huge barrier. So the lack of affordability should be also overcome to enable all people, including persons with disability, to have the economic possibility to acquire these ICTs. I only want to highlight two things. Example of accessible ICTs, I think most of you already know it. We find it in our computers, in our phones, in our tablets. But I put aside some screenshot. It's from my personal phone. I'm from Romania. My mother is almost 80, and I have a daughter 20 years old. And my daughter knows to speak Romanian, but it's illiterate, do not know to write correctly in Romanian. And my mother, since she's very old, has some difficulties to send text messages. So in the WhatsApp, you have a possibility to send messages, vocal messages. And this is not an accessible feature. This is universal design. So if we really want to make an inclusive world, if we really want to have a contribution to the inclusiveness in your life, think in a universal design. Rather you are architects, rather you are in technology, whatever you are doing, think to make it inclusive. Of course, there are still assistive technologies, and some of them are very useful, but these are for specific types of disabilities. Now, in concrete, why are accessible ICTs important, the benefits, and what actually governments can do? Well, ICTs, if they are accessible, are necessary to ensure that all citizens have access to the public information and communication that government is offering to their citizens. So it's important for them. Okay. But how to do? They have to create an accessible environment. And this can be easily done, for instance, through the public procurement. What does it mean? Did you know that governments are the biggest buyers in the world? And in general, all governments in the world have an average between 10 and 17% of their gross domestic product that they invest in buying equipment. So if they will put conditions indicating that they will only buy accessible ICTs, which is a benefit, they will reduce inequalities. They will create inclusive societies in their country. Ensure that all citizens participate in the country development, because if I can have my job, I can access to this, I will also pay my taxes instead of receiving whatever funding from the country. And in this way, we increase country economic growth. But what about the industry and the private sector? They say, so we have to change our line of fabrication, this will cost us money. Yes, but the global market for disability years ago was estimated for over 1.3 trillion, for 1.1 billion person. And we are talking about an increasement up to 4.3 billion. So can you imagine the global market for disability that it will be available? More than this, people with disabilities are also consumers. So let me tell you that every private sector is interested to attract more consumers and increase business opportunities. So if they are developing accessible ICT, why is worse for them? Because improve all quality of their ICTs, by create a market for these accessible ICTs, but also incentivize manufacturers and suppliers to innovate and produce better. And at the very end, what is the most important? They improve business benefit. Okay. Academic member. This one, I like it very much. Academic institutions have an important role in shaping level of education within all countries in the world. They have the means to change our mindsets, can adapt educational curriculum to respond to what industry needs, to the job opportunities, can create experts, can influence actually with everything they are doing the future social and economic development of the students and implicitly of the country. Because if the students are well prepared, they will immediately can contribute to the country development. And if academic institutions develop capacities in ICT accessibility, they will develop new and innovating ICT solutions. They will enable access to education to all people without discrimination, can also, through developing of a pool of experts in this topic, which is in high demand, can actually give them the possibility to have jobs in a world that actually is facing such huge unemployment rate. And through the ICT, you can sit at your home and actually work in another country. So, in fact, they can contribute to social and economic development of all, and of course, of the country. Last but not least, these accessible ICTs are also very important for persons with disabilities because they can achieve actually everything that a person without disabilities can have. Access to education, public services, labor, but they also can be included in the social and economic development of the country. And actually, for them, through the ICT, they can eliminate the barrier and enable them to have an independent life, such a person without disability. Well, in conclusion, this is good for all of us, for persons with disabilities to have access to ICT and independent life, for aging population
to have easier access to ICT for illiterate people, immigrants, refugees, or people who know several languages and perhaps not very well, to use accessible features and facilitate communication, as I was giving you the example with my mother. For industry and manufacturers, private sector, attract more consumers, academic, provide inclusive education, and governments to increase country social and economic development. So no doubt that this is a win for all. Lastly, I put some key issue on ICT accessibility that I would love to be considered by policymakers, beginning with raising awareness among all national key stakeholders is very important. Build consensus and inclusive policy making through encouraging national or regional debates in the topic. Mainstream in everything we can. And identify key steps for industry makers or local content providers. You know, there is not small step, it's progress. Promote ICT accessibility also as a business opportunities, as I told you. Establish clear targets, so through a periodic monitoring and evaluation to ensure the implementation. Encourage national training and educational program. This is so important, so important. And promote ICT accessibility in social content and language, voice recognition, text-to-speech interface. And again, last but not least, nothing about us without us. Involve and consult with end user, with a person with disability in national related process in ICT accessibility. I was telling you about this national program and what is the program doing. I think by now we went through all these key things that I put